abandoned no more. The cremated remains of more than a dozen Colorado veterans laid to rest today at Fort Logan.
It comes after months of research, hard work, and dead ends, as we found out in this Serving Those Who Serve special report. So listen to this. There's this group in Colorado.
We are the Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 1071.
And a few years back, they heard about a problem.
There were thousands of veterans that are in funeral homes that have been unclaimed. What can we do about that?
Imagine that. Men and women who served their country with honor, lived out their lives, and then they died, and their ashes were just abandoned?
I just can't imagine why that would ever happen. So that's kind of how the idea was sparked.
So for the last decade or so, they've gone from mortuary to mortuary in the Denver area, and they've discovered about 2,000 unclaimed urns on the shelves. Then came the hard work.
And talk a little bit about your research and what you did.
Finding out if they're veterans, and if so, getting them buried with honors at Fort Logan National Cemetery.
That's a lot of work.
Finally, a final resting place.
These are veterans that are brothers and sisters in service to our country.
So they enlisted the help of a group of local college students.
It was very hard to dig up practically anything on him.
Assignment: find out all you can about these unclaimed veterans.
This veteran,
including this man right here,
Mr. Mergler, for some reason he was still sitting on the shelf out at the funeral home when his wife passed away some 10 years later. She was buried at Fort Logan, but he was not.
Who is Norman Mergler?
Online, there's no trace of the guy. You cannot find him.
What did they uncover about his life?
We found an obituary for Norman's mother, but not for Norman himself.
What about his next of kin?
It was a daughter, and she was living in Aurora at the time.
Did she even know? Her dad's remains had been sitting on a mortuary shelf for nearly half a century.
Here, this is Stephanie.
I'm sorry to bother you. I'm calling because I'm working on a story that I hope maybe you could help me with.
Oh, really?
We're about to find out. Is he your dad?
Oh, my gosh, yes.
What it took to find Norman. This Lakewood funeral home,
there's 5 more of them,
is where we finally get acquainted with Norman Mergler.
14 veterans.
Since June 1976, almost 48 years ago, his ashes have been tucked away in storage, along with dozens of other unclaimed remains at a local mortuary.
They're all labeled, and that's what we started from.
And no one quite knows why.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Bill Bridges and his team are here to figure it out.
Okay, we need 1 Marine Corps then.
Norman and all the others you see here were veterans, but it took months to confirm their military records.
Fronda. Okay.
And months of uncovering their backstories, so that American service members, ignored by time and circumstance, are forgotten no more.
We're going to transfer the ashes from the temporary urns into the final urns.
And as they open the lid on Norman Mergler's dust-covered urn for the first time in a half-century, they also open up an opportunity for us to try and figure out who he is and why he's here.
Glad to see so many people interested in history, number one.
Thankfully, we have some help with that. Students in Carol Helstosky's history class at the University of Denver.
A few of the fellows were sitting around a table drinking coffee, and this topic came up about veterans that had passed away that were sitting in funeral homes on the shelf somewhere and had never, ever been given the opportunity to receive a burial in a national cemetery.
On this day, they're getting their class assignment. Help the Vietnam Veterans of America chapter with something called the Honors Burial Project.
Your class is going to be trying to develop some individual biographies of these folks that have been left behind.
Now, a little background here. By this point, the veterans had already gone behind the scenes at Stork Morley Mortuary.
I'm Peter Morley. I'm the managing partner for Stork Morley Funeral Home.
Peter Morley recently took over the funeral home, and with it came the unclaimed remains of 219 people, many of whom had been there for decades.
All the way back from the 1950s. There's some family that just never want them again. They just go through the process, and then they said, you do what you can with them.
You know, you can't get into the minds of the people that were the relatives of that particular veteran and what may have been going on in their personal lives at the time when that veteran passed away. We do know that a number of these veterans did not have a surviving family member.
And so we're in the process of making sure they all are laid to rest.
To do that, the Veterans Group cataloged all of them, put them in a database, and realized of those 219 unclaimed remains, 27 of them were veterans.
It's a little crazy to think about why they would be forgotten.
questions about any of that.
So back to those DU students. They've been paired up and each assigned a veteran to research and write a bio for.
Mr. Mergler passed away 10 years before his wife.
And the two students who got Norman Mergler really have their work cut out for them.
For some reason, he was still sitting on the shelf out at the funeral home when his wife passed away some 10 years later.
Remember, he died in 1976, before the internet, before social media, and he left barely a trace. Just one single clue, a headstone.
She was buried at Fort Logan, but he was not.
It is the kind of situation only a surviving family member could really explain, and it's not looking great that those DU students are going to find one of those. But while they go to work on that, there is all kinds of other work going on behind the scenes. There's this group called the Colorado Woodworkers Guild.
What we're doing is collecting wood, taking wood donations, and building urns to provide honorable burials for veterans who've been abandoned.
When we first heard about this, I was just shocked because I had never thought that there were unclaimed remains of our veterans.
So on their own dime and on their own time,
We put the bottom piece in.
they make these custom wooden urns for those veterans who are about to get the burial they earned and deserve.
When I've mentioned this project to just friends and colleagues, they say, tell me more.
When we first started doing this, we had cremains in cardboard boxes, ashes falling out of boxes. I mean, it was horrible. And the fact that we now have these beautiful boxes and urns to place these cremains in, it just kind of puts a finishing touch on giving these cremains the honor that they deserve.
I think we're going to be calling on some of you.
Now time to check back in with those DU students.
Professor Escobedo and I will look through everyone's biography.
They've spent a couple weeks now researching the veterans, writing bios, and uncovering all kinds of details about their lives.
Online, there is no trace of the guy. You cannot find him.
But Evelyn Holden
It's important that he's remembered.
and Douglas Joyce had a tough time. They were assigned Norman Mergler.
And somehow he just kind of disappeared off the face of the earth when he died.
It wasn't all bad news, though. They did find this old high school yearbook photo from 1939 in Pueblo, Colorado.
He graduated from Central High School. He enlisted in the Navy in 1940, and he was stationed at Pearl Harbor in early 1941. He was assigned to a destroyer 2 days after the attack.
He was there when the U.S. entered World War II, and he served all the way through the end of the war.
After the military, you can find nothing.
Trail ends there.
They were able to figure out that he was married to Madeline, and as for kids,
We can only find that he has a daughter, and the daughter almost has no trace. We have no information on her whatsoever.
and then we were able to do a background search, and we found a name and a phone number in Aurora.
This is Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Hi.
I'm calling because I'm working on a story that I hope maybe you could help me with.
Okay.
They were able to identify and locate the remains of Norman Mergler.
Oh, really?
Is he your dad?
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
And 2 days after this fateful conversation, a face-to-face meeting that changes everything.
I'm Stephanie Mergler, and my dad was Norman Mergler.
And she had the pictures and the stories that filled in the gaps of how he lived and how he died.
He had been playing golf and had pain in his left arm. So he came home and laid down and had a heart attack and never regained consciousness.
What she didn't know is why her mom never did pick up those ashes and spread them.
My mom would get upset to talk about it, but I thought that maybe his cousin had taken his ashes to southern Colorado where he fished with his cousin.
But in hindsight, she thinks her mom was just too devastated to do much of anything at the
They
time.
had been married 32 years.
And apart for the last 48 years. But not anymore. Earlier today at Fort Logan National Cemetery, a long overdue ceremony.
These are our heroes and our brothers and our sister, and indeed today they are finally coming home.
For 14 veterans stuck on mortuary shelves no longer. And Stephanie Mergler was right there, front and center.
Norman Earl Mergler grew up in Pueblo, Colorado.
To pay respects to her father, who will rest forever nearby his loving wife after all.
The legacies of these veterans are complex and deep. They inspire us to build community, acknowledge loss, and hope for everlasting peace.
the culmination of the work of veterans and volunteers, students and craftsmen and women.
Well, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what Norman contributed to this country.
On behalf of the President of the United States, the U.S. Navy, and a grateful nation, we wish you to accept this token of our esteem for your father's faithful service.
Each of whom wanted to have a role in writing the final chapter for a group of American heroes like Norman Earl Mergler.
It does seem like Norman's story will have a happy ending.
We're not going to forget his name anytime soon.
Neither will I have to think that when you're trying to teach college students history, what better way to do it than this?
I'm sure it's impactful. Watching the story is impactful. It is so admirable and inspiring to see the number of people who are out there making sure that these veterans are not forgotten, that they're not abandoned, that they are honored the way they deserve to be honored. And thank you for your hard work. And you put a lot of heart and soul into the story. And it shows, and I'm glad that it's being told.
It was a thrill to share this story and a thrill to work with the Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 1071. And by the way, they're going to have another ceremony to lay the remaining 13 veterans to rest 2 weeks from today, April 30th at 1 p.m. at Fort Logan National Cemetery. So if you're inclined, you might want to show up and show your support.
Incredible work by all people involved.